What if the place you come from no longer remembers you, and the place you live in never really sees you? In this episode, we travel from Spanish-ruled Equatorial Guinea to post-apartheid South Africa, following the traces that empire left on names, faces, and families. We meet children born of two worlds, never quite belonging to either, and witness how colonial systems echo long after the flags come down. This is a story about inheritance, about borders, both drawn and internalized, and about the quiet, lifelong search for a place to belong. Hello, and welcome back to Gateway Books by Crestance. I'm your host, Cindy Cruz, reader, researcher, and occasional scribbler in the margins. This is the podcast where historical fiction meets real history, where we read with one foot in the story and the other in the archive. Every episode, we start with a novel and follow its echoes through time, sometimes across continents, sometimes across centuries, and always towards something bigger than the page. Today, we're stepping into a world of fading empires and fragile identities, a world where race, memory, and power are tangled in every glance, and where the most personal question, who am I, is shaped by politics, geography, and the long shadow of colonial rule. We begin with Palm Trees in the Snow by Luz Gabás, then move to The Colonizer and the Colonized by Albert Memmi, and close with Born a Crime by Trevor. If you enjoy this kind of deep dive, literary, layered, and grounded in real history, go ahead and like, subscribe, and share. It helps us grow and keeps thoughtful stories like these in the conversation. This is episode 15, Palm Trees in the Snow and the Politics of Belonging. Let's begin. When Luz Gabás's Palm Trees in the Snow opens, the past is already whispering. Clarence returns to her father's hometown in the Spanish mountainside after his death and uncovers a fragment of a letter, just enough to tug at something buried. What unfolds is a layered story, moving between Clarence's modern search for truth and her uncle Kilian's youth as a colonist in Spanish Guinea, what we know now as Equatorial Guinea. At first glance, this is a sweeping love story. Lush landscapes, cacao plantations, forbidden romance, and decades-old secrets. But underneath that surface is a portrait of colonialism that is far more complicated. It is a narrative shaped by distance, by the distance of time, of memory, and of privilege. And in that distance lies both the novel's beauty and its blind spots. In the 1950s, young Kilian leaves snowy Spain for the tropical island of Fernando Po, part of Spain's last colonial outpost in Africa. His family, like many others from Spain, is drawn there by opportunity, the lure of land, status, and a kind of freedom that feels larger than anything they knew in their own mountain village. It is a story that echoes the language of adventure and civilizing mission, found throughout European colonial narratives. But that freedom, as the novel slowly shows, was built on deep inequality. The racial and cultural hierarchies in Fernando Po are everywhere, in how people are addressed, in who is allowed to move freely, and in who is expected to remain silent. Spaniards like Kilian and his brother Jacobo hold land and power. Black Guineans serve, labor, and observe, part of the landscape, but not part of the decision-making. Even when Kilian forms a romantic relationship with Bisila, a local woman whose strength and presence center much of the emotional core of the story, the boundary between their worlds is never truly erased. It simply becomes more fragile, more strained. Luz Gabás gives us the nostalgia of colonialism, filtered through memory, family honor, and the ache of something lost. But she also allows that nostalgia to crack. We see the tensions of assimilation, the wounds caused by secrecy, and the way empire rearranges personal lives, often without apology. Clarence, decades later, is the child of that silence. Her journey is not just genealogical, it's existential. Who were we? And who paid for the version of us we choose to remember? But not everything Clarence uncovers is shaped by love or longing. One of the most painful turns in the novel comes not from the romance between Kilian and Bisila, but from its undoing. A child is born, not of love, but of harm. The scene in which this occurs is unflinching, and Gabás does not obscure the violence of it. In that moment, the novel strips away the romantic veneer of empire and forces the reader to confront what it often took and what it cost. That child, Inigo, is not named by the man responsible. He grows up in the margins of several worlds, connected to the colonizers by blood, but not by name or legacy. His mother, Bisila, carries the weight of that silence with both dignity and quiet defiance. She tells Clarence very little at first, allowing her to walk slowly into the truth. And when the truth comes out, it does not arrive with drama, but with ache. Inigo is not a metaphor. He is a boy, then a man, whose life was shaped by choices made before he could speak. He is neither hidden nor fully acknowledged. And this perhaps is one of the most accurate portrayals of what it means to be biracial in a colonial setting. To exist visibly, but unofficially. To be known, but not to be spoken of. To be present, but not protected. Clarence's relationship to Inigo becomes the emotional core of her own transformation. She does not begin this journey expecting to meet a brother, but to challenge the narrative she was raised with. But what she finds reshapes not just her understanding of her family, but her understanding of Spain's role in Africa and the cost of forgetting. There's a moment, late in the novel, where Clarence looks at Inigo and realizes that he has no interest in being folded neatly into her version of history. He does not want to be a footnote in someone else's redemption. He does not look to reconcile. He is asking her to see the truth and to sit with it. And this, too, is a kind of reckoning. Not one that ends in forgiveness, but one that begins in recognition. Gabás uses Clarence as a bridge between past and present, between Spain and Guinea, between silence and speech. But Clarence is also a reminder of the limits of empathy when history has been curated to comfort the descendants of the powerful. Her discomfort is not the story. It's the beginning of it. And when we look beyond personal arcs, the novel has a deeper question. What happens after the colonizers leave? In the chapter set during the independence and beyond, we witness the realignment of power in the island. The Spanish leave, but their system remains. Class hierarchies, racial divisions, access to education, land ownership, all of it has been shaped by decades of colonial rule. And as the new leadership takes over, some patterns are disrupted, while others simply inverted. What was done under the name of empire is now done under the name of the state. This part of the story is quieter, but just as important. Gabás does not give us a triumphant independence narrative. Instead, we see how difficult it is to extract colonial logic from a place it has reshaped so thoroughly. The legacy of empire is not just political, it's intimate. It lives in language, in inheritance, in unspoken grief. It lives in the people who were expected to stay quiet and move on. Clarence, as a visitor, sees this. She sees how much her family left behind. Not just land and property, but unresolved ties, wounded people, and a history that is never fully theirs to tell. She begins to understand that coming to terms with that legacy does not mean tying it up. It means telling it honestly, even the parts that do not reflect well. In the end, Palm Trees in the Snow is not a perfect portrait of colonialism. It is in many ways a novel rooted in Spanish memory. But it does what many historical fiction novels aim for. It opens a door. It prompts a question. It disrupts an easy version of the past and asks what else might still be buried, waiting to be found. The final notes are not about closure. They are about presence, about staying with the discomfort, about seeing people whose stories were almost, but not quite, written out. and that, in the context of empire and all it left behind, is a beginning worth listening to. When we read a novel like Palm Trees in the Snow, it's easy to be pulled into the lushness of the setting, the intimacy of relationships, the sweep of memory. But behind the love stories and betrayals is a larger, more persistent question. How does a colonial system shape not just the land it occupies, but the people inside it? How does it shape their silence, their desires, their sense of self? Albert Memmi's The Colonizer and the Colonized gives us a framework for understanding what Luz Gabás' novel never fully names. That colonialism is not just about land or power. It is a relationship built on dependency, distortion, and denial. And once that relationship is established, it persists even after the colonizers go home. Memmi, a Jewish Tunisian living under French rule, understood what it meant to be both inside and outside of power. He knew the temptation to side with the dominant culture. He also knew the cost. His book, first published in 1957, is short, clear, and devastating. It doesn't shout. It doesn't rage. It simply lays out piece by piece what happens when one group of people is taught to rule and another is taught to accept it. He begins by describing the colonizer. At first, the colonizer arrives with a sense of adventure, maybe even benevolence. He believes in the civilizing mission. He believes he is helping. But over time, to maintain his position, he must believe something else. That the colonized is inferior, lazy, childlike, incapable of self-rule. Because if the colonized is his equal, then the whole system collapses. So the colonizer learns to dehumanize, not always with cruelty, but with consistency. In Palm Trees in the Snow, we see this in the casual superiority of Kilian's brother Jacobo, in the way he treats the plantation as his birthright, and the workers as an extension of his will. But we also see it in more subtle ways, in Kilian's discomfort when Bisila claims space, in the unease that follows any disruption of the expected roles. Even when the affection is real, the imbalance remains. The structure does not dissolve just because emotions enter the frame. Memmi then turns to the colonized, and here the portrait is just as complicated. The colonized person is not simply a victim. They are caught in a web of contradictions. They are told they are inferior, but also punished when they try to rise. They are offered assimilation, but denied full acceptance. They are visible only in ways that serve the system. This internal conflict breeds silence and shame, and sometimes complicity. Memmi writes that the colonized individual is constantly on trial. Everything about their existence is questioned. Language, customs, dreams. Over time, they may come to believe the myths about themselves. They may resist, but neither option offers peace. Nico, in Palm Trees in the Snow, grows up with this contradiction. He is the child of violence and silence. His life is shaped by decisions he did not make, by a system that refused to acknowledge him. He is not hidden, but he is not claimed. And when independence comes, the world around him reshapes, but does not restore. Memmi's most haunting insight is this. Even after the colonizers leave, the structure often remains. The roles have been internalized. No leaders emerge, but they mimic the old patterns. The colonized, now technically free, may replicate the very system that oppressed them, because that's the only model they know. We see this in the way Equatorial Guinea realigns after Spanish departure. Political independence does not mean liberation from hierarchy. Land is still controlled by the powerful. Silence still protects those who once benefited. The system shapes clothes, not character. And for those who exist between categories, like Nico, or like Trevor Noah in Born a Crime, the aftermath is even more disorienting. They are not simply remnants of a colonial past. They are reminders that the logic of separation is still alive, that some bodies don't quite belong. Memmi doesn't offer easy solutions. He doesn't propose policy or reform. What he gives us is a lens, a way to see how deep the roots of colonization go, and how they tangle themselves into the most personal aspects of life: family, love, and identity. Reading Memmi today, the language feels older, but the insights do not. In a world still struggling with inherited systems of control, in language, in education, in borders, his clarity is bracing. He forces us to ask, what have we accepted as normal simply because it was there before us? And for readers like Clarence, piecing together her father's life, Memmi offers an important caution. It's not enough to recover memories. We must also question the frame around them. We must ask why certain things were remembered and others forgotten. Who benefited from that forgetting? Who paid the cost? That question carries forward into Born a Crime, where Trevor Noah enters the world as a literal contradiction. His very existence, as the child of a Black social mother and a white Swiss father, was illegal under apartheid. And yet, he survives. He thrives, but always with a kind of coded fluency. Reading rooms, slipping between languages, performing safety. If Memmi shows us the structure, Trevor Noah shows us the improvisation it demands. The next story begins not in the aftermath of empire, but in its living, breathing shadow. There's a moment in Born a Crime when Trevor Noah, still a young boy, watches his mother fling herself from a moving car to escape an abusive partner. He doesn't frame it as trauma. He doesn't pause for emphasis. He tells it with the same rhythm he uses to describe skipping church or hiding from the police. Equal parts absurd, painful, and sharply absurd. That's the power of this book. Trevor Noah doesn't write as a victim or as a philosopher. He writes as someone who lived through systems designed to define, confine, and erase him. And he came out not just fluent in their codes, but capable of laughing at their logic. Born a Crime isn't a memoir of trauma. It's a memoir of survival, improvisation, and the deeply layered absurdity of apartheid South Africa. He was born during a time when his very existence, his skin, his name, his parents' relationship was illegal. Under apartheid, racial categories were rigid, state-enforced, and hierarchically brutal. Trevor, as a biracial child, didn't fit any of them. He wasn't Black enough. He wasn't white. He was a walking violation, hidden indoors and kept away from public spaces where his identity would raise questions his family couldn't safely answer. And yet, from the very beginning, Trevor Noah is in motion. He moves between townships, between languages, between worlds. He learned Zulu, Xhosa, Afrikaans, and English, becoming not just bilingual, but culturally agile. That ability to shapeshift isn't framed as a gift. It is a necessity, a survival skill honed in a country built on separation, surveillance, and suppression. What sets this memory apart is its refusal to flatten complexity. Noah's mother, Patricia, is deeply religious and fiercely independent. She raises him with equal parts scripture and strategy, teaching him not just how to pray, but how to disappear when police come. Their relationship is the book's heart. Complicated, sometimes harsh, always rooted in an unshakable belief in Trevor's right to exist in the fullness of his being. Unlike many memoirs of injustice, Born a Crime doesn't rely on dramatic moments to hold its weight. It's in the ordinary that the book becomes extraordinary. Buying CDs, riding minibuses, getting caught shoplifting. Each story reveals another facet of how race, class, and power operated in a society still shaped by its colonial and apartheid past. And this is where the book resonates so clearly with Palm Trees in the Snow and The Colonizer and the Colonized. Trevor Noah is the product of a system that defined people by their color and location, but refuses to accept those definitions as fixed. Like Iniko, he's born into silence. Like Memmi's colonized subject, he's asked to internalize his place. But instead of surrendering, he learns to read the system, to mimic it, and to mock it. That mockery is more than comedy. It is critique. a way to disarm the machinery of oppression by exposing its contradictions. For every absurd rule, like the bureaucratic obsession with racial categories, there's a moment of subversion, a joke, a dodge. And what emerges is a portrait not just of injustice, but of ingenuity. There's also tenderness in this book, toward his mother, toward the languages that stitched him into different communities, even toward the flawed, fractured South Africa that raised him. Noah doesn't excuse the violence or the injustice, but he does reveal the people who kept moving inside it, the friends, neighbors, teachers who carried on in spite of it all. When we talk about the legacy of colonialism, it's easy to speak in terms of government, policies, and treaties. But Born a Crime reminds us that the real weight of that legacy is carried in everyday lives, in who gets to walk freely, in who is seen, in whose stories are allowed to be told. Trevor Noah tells his story with humor because humor was how he survived. He doesn't shy away from the darker edges. He knows that his ability to navigate those structures, his light skin, his gift with language, gave him access others didn't have. He doesn't glorify it. He complicates it. In the final chapters, he reflects on his relationship with his stepfather, an abusive man who eventually shoots his mother. Noah offers no tidy resolution. There is pain, but there is also defiance. His mother lives. She heals. And so does he. Though healing, in this case, doesn't mean forgetting. It means carrying the story forward with honesty and care. Born a Crime gives us a window into the living aftershocks of systems designed to divide. It shows us what happens when a child grows up learning not just who he is, but who he is allowed to be, and then decides to challenge the terms altogether. What does it mean to belong to a place that never fully claimed you? To inherit the language, the customs, the memories, and yet always feel slightly out of step with the story being told. In Palm Trees in the Snow, we saw how love, land, and silence entwined across generations shaped by empire. In Nico, Born into the Spaces Between Worlds is never offered a full truth, only fragments, hints, erasures. Albert Memmi taught us that colonialism isn't just conquest. It is a relationship, one that embeds itself in memory, in identity, in what people believe they're allowed to want. Even after the flags come down, the arrangement lingers, and sometimes those once colonized step into the roles they were taught, mistaking them for progress. And then Trevor Noah arrives, not to offer resolution, but to hold up a mirror. His life, built on contradiction, forces us to ask, what do we do with systems that were never built for us in the first place? Do we mimic them? Rewrite them? Laugh in their faces? Each of these stories is different in tone, in setting, in style, but they share a deeper current, a reckoning with what remains after the empire goes quiet. How do you reclaim what was taken? How do you speak what was never named? And perhaps most quietly, how do you live a full, dignified life in a world still shaped by the shadows of someone else's design? There are no easy answers, but maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point lies in naming the questions clearly and listening for the silence in between. That's it for this episode of Gateway Books by Crestance. If you've ever questioned where you belong or laughed your way through the awkward in-between, this one was for you. We'll be back next week with another set of stories that open the door to the past and shine a light on the present. Until then, you can find reflections, book lovers' gifts, and journals for your own history at crestance.com. Because colonialism may have drawn the maps, but we're writing in the margins now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, because your bookshelf isn't just for decorating. It's for starting conversations that matter.